Hi everyone, and welcome to our webinar. I'm going to specifically focus on the topic of leadership communication in a crisis. Now, the reality is that the Chinese word, the Mandarin word for crisis is weiji, and it's made up of two characters, one standing for danger, the other standing for opportunity. And I think for leaders dealing with a major crisis situation, which of these characters will take prominence depends upon the effectiveness of the crisis leadership, the effectiveness of the crisis management, and the effectiveness of the crisis communication. And we are living in a period that is unprecedented. The global COVID-19 pandemic is a crisis at speed, at scale, and at scope unlike anything we've ever seen. It is a health crisis, a social crisis, and an economic crisis. And in all of that, effective communication needs to come to the fore so as that leaders can engage with their stakeholders to survive during the crisis, to stabilize, and then post-crisis to surge in whatever change and transformations are going to take place. So I'm going to talk about a couple of different things in the webinar in the formal part, and then happy to take any of your questions after that on anything that's relevant to anyone in our community. So crisis messaging is where it starts, and messages are at the heart of communication. We share and exchange messages, and in this world of crisis communication, it is a world largely of virtual messaging as well. Now, I've just posted an article about this particular item on INSEAD's knowledge side. And the first point I make in that article is that every message matters in a crisis. No matter what the format is, whether or not you're doing a video cast, sending emails, doing social media externally, doing social media or messaging internally, using WebEx, Zoom, FaceTime, Skype, or anything else, every time a leader is engaging with somebody, with interaction, every message matters. And there are some key checklists that will make crisis messaging more effective in every situation and in every message. And I wrote about this in this INSEAD Knowledge article, and in particular, I focused and gave the examples of the New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern and the New York Governor Andrew Cuomo as crisis communication champions, because they have been following and demonstrating almost all of the principles that I'm going to share with you that come out of my research and my practice work over nearly 2 decades around this. And I'll use some examples from them later on in video that you can see to draw this out. But I've also mentioned in that article a number of business leaders who are also putting this into practice. So it starts, checklist 1 is the so-called golden rules of crisis messaging. And there are 3 of these. Acknowledge the problem, express empathy, and explain the actions. Every crisis message that is important to a leader must tick these 3 criteria. They are the absolute golden rules. And it starts with acknowledge the problem or issue. What is the situation being faced? What is the update on the situation or the issue? Why is it such a problem? Acknowledge that the issue exists. It's not just the global pandemic here, it's the issue as it arises in your management team, in your organization, in your company, in your leadership team. And then very importantly, express empathy. People are uncertain. There is an enormous volatility. There is fear. People are coping with difficult situations. Many have actually lost people to the COVID disease. When we express empathy in a message, when we genuinely express an emotional content, it creates connectivity. And one thing I've seen with a lot of leaders is they do that in a big message, and in their next 5 emails, it's just short, sharp, to the point, no expression of empathy. This is a mistake in a crisis situation. And very importantly, explain the actions. Every crisis message should be leading to actions. What do people need to do about something? Where do we need to go on this? How are we doing it? But many leaders ask me, they say, Ian, look, I can't explain the actions because we're not sure yet what we're going to do. That's okay. If you can't explain the specific actions, explain the process you are using as a leader to find the answers and solutions. When you take any of your major crisis messaging, test it against these 3 golden rules. Acknowledge the problem, express empathy, and explain the actions. Second checklist, over-communicate credibly. Over-communication is a virtue in a crisis situation. When you do not communicate sufficiently, the vacuum of silence will get filled, and it usually gets filled with rumours, innuendo, and unsubstantiated material. So over-communicate credibly. And there are 3 keys here as well. Remain clear. Short, sharp, to the point, and frequent communication is much better than overwhelming people with too long a piece of communication infrequently. People lose attention and they don't feel a sense of momentum of the connectivity of the communication. Second principle here, remain credible. Do not use thought bubbles. Thought bubbles are ideas that come in the moment that have not been pre-prepared. And if you're a leader talking to your employees and you're just shooting the breeze, that can be taken and misinterpreted very negatively. Equally, stick with the facts. Using facts, statistics, and information helps people perceive that the leader and the leadership team are on top of the situation. They're remaining credible. Now, that doesn't mean you can't change your mind. Evidence might suggest a pivot point in what you've been doing, but you have to explain why the situation has changed. And that leads to the third dimension here, remaining consistent. In the communication, in the messaging, helps people feel that the communication engagement is not just a one-off. It's part of an ongoing dialogue. And this includes the listening and feedback that we'll all be doing as leaders at the moment with our teams through our virtual connectivity. Once again, you can change your mind or suggest we need to make an alteration to this pathway. And in the last 8 weeks in businesses all over the world, that's been happening because new information has emerged, new government regulations have emerged, changes have taken place. But we have to explain what those are and why we need to make the change. So consistency does not mean saying we are stuck with one position forever. Third key checklist is make the communication messages meaningful. When something is meaningful, when it's relevant and resonant to people, they are more likely to react positively and take action from it. And this is most important to make the communication stakeholder-centric, meaning and purpose in the context of the situation of the different stakeholders that each of us are communicating with. Crucial stakeholders like customers, our employees, whose health, safety and welfare and well-being has been top of mind for all good leaders in this crisis. But there are other significant stakeholders that may be relevant to your organisation: regulators, investors, partners, people in the supply chain. Have a map of those stakeholders and ask yourself, when I'm preparing my message as a leader to different stakeholder groups, how do I make sure that its meaning and purpose is clear, recognising their circumstance? Now, I mentioned a couple of leaders, and I'm going to give you a couple of examples. Jacinda Ardern first, and then Andrew Cuomo. Jacinda Ardern, the New Zealand Prime Minister. I'm using publicly available video, and I'm using governmental leaders for privacy reasons, because these people put their material out into the public domain. Most leaders doing their WebEx calls with their employees are not posting publicly. But they give us a good example of these in terms of messaging. So let me show you two simultaneous clips of Jacinda Ardern, firstly in her more formal statesperson-like role as New Zealand Prime Minister, announcing the dramatic extension of lockdown to its highest level, followed by her own personal Facebook streaming post just to check in with people.
We currently have 102 cases, but so did Italy once. Now the virus has overwhelmed their health system and hundreds of people are dying every day. The situation here is moving at pace, and so must we. We have always said we would act early, decisively, and go hard, and we will. Evening, everyone. That I would jump online quickly and just check in with everyone, really, as we all prepare to hunker down for a few weeks. Excuse the casual attire. Can be a messy business putting toddlers to bed, so I'm not in my work clothes, so forgive me for that.
So interestingly, she is showing a repertoire ability to be able to change her tonality and approach, more formal, less formal, depending upon the circumstance. But if you watch either of those messages, you will find that she acknowledges the problem, expresses empathy, and explains the actions every time. A totally different type of leader and a totally different cultural context is the governor of the state of New York, Andrew Cuomo. Cuomo is a very different kind of communicator, but his daily media briefings, which are widely publicised through almost every channel that you can imagine, have been part and parcel of effective leadership communication management in this crisis. Now, his style is totally different to Jacinda's, but as you'll see, he emphasises the credibility. You'll hear him in the clip I'm about to show you talking about the numbers, the facts, bringing people up to date in an easy to understand, both spoken and visualised way, but then also expressing an empathetic position related to the people who live and work in his state.
Number of people tested, 18,000. Positive cases are up 8,000, total of 122,000 cases. Number of patients discharged, total discharged up is 12,000, 1,700 discharged in one day. Number of deaths is up, that's the bad news. It's 44,159, and we pray for each and every one of them and their families, and that is up, and that is the worst news. Liberate, as my daughters would say, they're seeking liberation. We liberate people who can go back to work because we know that they're not in a vulnerable category and they're negative. And I think that is, it's under development now, the rapid testing, and we're part of it. But that is going to be the answer, I believe. And we get through it because we are New York State tough. Thank you.
So a different style, more measured, bringing in data, very much so every day, appealing to the cultural ethos of the significant stakeholders that are relevant to him and his leadership situation. He also, in every one of these press conferences, acknowledges the problem, explains a lot around why certain things are being done, expresses empathy, and explains the actions and gives regular updates. It's clear, it's precise. And he also supports this with stay home, stop the spread, save lives. A triadic three-part message that underscores every time he sends out his leadership messages. Another dimension that I've been researching on again in this period and built on a number of years of research is around the idea of virtual leadership presence. Because there's a reality, we are almost exclusively socially distant. We are socially distant, but we are virtually connected. And here, leadership presence is largely from our laptops and devices. It is a different context and situation than live performance on stage, discussion interpersonally around a table or across one another in chairs. It is a different situation because the technology influences it. Excuse me. So virtual leadership presence involves understanding some specific techniques that affect how we are perceived and how we perceive others through these devices. Leadership presence itself is a combination of authenticity, visibility, and communication approach. It's the total combination of character, of leadership approach, of leadership actions and behaviours, and of the way in which we interact, including our listening and engagement. But in specific terms, the communication techniques that influence here change the dimension of who we are. I described it in this article this way. It is the leader seen as a screenshot, not a stage performer, nor a personal conversationalist. That is a different circumstance. And there are 5 elements that I can suggest you think about that will dramatically improve the leadership presence as it is communicated through these devices. Principle 1, control body language, increases perceptions of competence, involvement, and hope. What does that mean? First of all, it means being open in your body language rather than being closed like I am doing here. It means keeping control of the body so that it's not swaying all over the place, in and out of the camera angle and making everybody seasick. It's about a sense that the communication wants to engage by using a lot of inclusive gesturing rather than gesturing that pushes people away into the screen. Controlling our body language gives a sense of focus to the presence. That is then supported by engaging our eyes and face, because this elevates perceptions of trust, relationship, and commitment through the virtual leadership presence. And in particular, the eyes. We need to spend a significant proportion of our time doing as I'm doing here, looking at the pinhole camera. Occasionally, we'll look at the screen to see people, but mostly attend to the camera, especially if you're talking. Because if your eyes are downwards all the time and ignore the pinhole camera, perceptions of disconnection create. You see, the camera is not embedded in the screen. And so therefore, it's at an angle as it's perceived to those who are receiving the visual communication and vice versa. Equally, if you use open and controlled body language, your facial expression is going to move naturally rather than freezing up and tensing it like I'm doing now, which also tenses the voice. And that brings me to the third point. Emphasize your vocal quality, which expands perceptions of clarity, comprehension, and purpose in the communication. And that involves how fast we speak. So if we're starting to speak far too fast and far too quickly, slow down, overmove the lips, increase pauses. Because one of the things that the devices do that restricts so much is that the pinhole cameras exaggerate the movement. And the digital sounds through the microphones of the device compress the sound and remove some of its resonance. So if we speak too quickly, if we don't move and articulate our lips, if we don't project our sound forward, the sound becomes mumbled and unclear and you can't understand what it's saying. This is especially important when there's no visual image and sound is the only thing that's expressive. The fourth area here is to create digital spatial awareness, which enhances perceptions of trustworthiness, inclusion, and meaningfulness. Spatial awareness in the real live world, a leader, when they go, say, on stage, can either own the space, share the space, give the space, or be consumed by the space. Well, we also have spatial awareness as it's defined by the pinhole cameras. And these pinhole cameras exaggerate spatial awareness so that if you move too far back and you distance yourself from the spaces I'm doing now, it becomes disconnected. Equally, if you start to over-dominate the space or over-dominate it like this, it becomes claustrophobic to those who are perceiving it. Finding the right comfortable position, allowing our digital spatial awareness to think about the camera frame, the visual images, when and how we're using our hands and gestures, this is crucial. And all four of these contribute to a fine one, which is the fifth, align virtual presence with message. This ensures perceptions of engagement, credibility, and action. When what we say and our body language matches it, it's much more credible. If I sort of do this, close my arms, look down, look away, look disconnected and say, look, we've all got to work hard on this and I'm really listening to all the feedback I'm getting. I'm sorry, the virtual presence and the message are not in alignment. And this is very important. This is very important because when we have a pinhole camera and a device, these devices exaggerate the eyes, the face, the upper half of the body, and also this compressed voice sound. And if that is not matching the message, then it's very difficult to build credibility for those who are listening. So within the crisis, your leadership is enacted through your communication and engagement. I'm assuming that every leader who is listening or watching to this has taken care of the safety and well-being of their employees. They've taken care of securing their cash and liquidity, that they've got a crisis management plan and team that is looking at resources, operations, supply chain, customer service, that you're engaging with your critical stakeholders like customers. But through all of this, it is the communication that influences how people react. I'll repeat again. The crisis messaging needs to meet the golden rules. Acknowledge the problem, express empathy, explain the actions. Over-communicate credibly, be clear, be credible, be consistent, and make the communication meaningful for the circumstances of the interaction that you're trying to engage within. And then build out your virtual leadership presence in such a way. In the article I've posted on LinkedIn on this, I've given some ideas about developing feedback for yourself and from others to help build out the presence dimensions. So shortly we'll go to Q&A and open this up. I hope these are some ideas to think about, to become thought-provoking and to test. I think the checklists are really useful because if you've got an important message, just see, does it match these criteria? If it does, the chance of it being more effective is much greater. By the way, shortly, INSEAD will have a new online course, Leadership in a Crisis, Secure Your Future, that I've worked on with Professors Paddy, Sameer and Pushan. And this is likely to be relevant to leaders and managers who may be in your organisation or other organisations. And we'll touch upon a number of the themes I've talked about today, but that is something that is part of INSEAD's continuing growing platform of online and virtual engagement with people. So Thanks for joining the webinar. I'm going to, in a moment, stop sharing my screen and then be able to take questions and answers. And we'll try and make this as interactive as we can, but just give me a moment as I close things off.